This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, globally, stocks headed for their first weekly gain in 3 weeks, and that's amid a surge in commodity prices. We saw MSCI's index of emerging market stocks gaining 0.3% on the day, hitting a one-week high. However, emerging markets are set to drop for the second consecutive week, led by a spike in coronavirus infections, as well as inflationary pressures and fiscal uncertainties. Now, in South Africa, the JSE ended the week on a 3-day winning streak, with local focus turning to Moody's release of its latest review. All major indices were up on the day. In Nigeria, the all-share index rose 0.2% on the day. That, of course, paired its retreat this year to about 2.6%. Now, also coming up on today's show. Payments giant Visa and financial services provider Tala partner to boost cryptocurrency adoption in emerging markets. Sudan restricts commodity imports to ease forex shortages. And China's private sector exports increase by 40%. Now, payments giant Visa and financial services provider Tala have partnered to boost cryptocurrency adoption in emerging markets. Now, the collaboration aims to make it easier for underbanked consumers to convert, store and use cryptocurrencies as part of everyday spend. The partnership is one of the first deals since Visa's announcement in March that it will start settling transactions in dollar-denominated stablecoins, especially Circle's USDC, which is the stablecoin governed by the Center Consortium. Now, Tala's integration with Circle and Stellar will enable its customers to have access to USDC in the firm's digital wallet, which in turn will be used in cross-border money transfers and, of course, easily exchanged into other digital assets. Now let's head to Zimbabwe now, where the government has announced plans to list a bond on the local exchange. The $250 million listing by the Infrastructure Development Bank of Zimbabwe will be the first note issuance on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange since 2001. Now, Zimbabwe is looking to raise funds for the expansion and upgrade of a main highway that links the country to its largest trading partner, South Africa. Total trade between the two nations stood at $2.4 billion last year. And of course, the 580-kilometer road links the capital Harare to Beitbridge, which is one of Africa's busiest border points. Now, according to officials, on average, about 25,000 people and 500 trucks pass through the border point on a daily. Well, let's now turn back to our top story for the day. Of course, Tala and Visa have partnered to put on a cryptocurrency platform, and we are going to get some insight into the future of cryptos and blockchain, but it looks like we've lost our guest there. So let's go to South Africa in the meantime. Now, the country's private sector activity expanded at its strongest rate in 9 years in April. That, of course, is as buoyant customer demand pushed new orders higher, and of course, as business confidence and employment continues to rise. As CGTN's Angelo Coppola now reports, the IHS Market Purchasing Managers Index rose to 53.7 in April from 50.3 in March, and that's, of course, is staying above the 50 level that indicates an expansion.
The Purchasing Managers Index rose to 53.7 in April from 50.3 in March. That's the highest reading since March 2012.
It is really upbeat. I think the first thing is the South African economy has really bounced back and it's recovered very, very quickly. It isn't a full recovery yet, but when we look at other PMIs like the one done by Stellenbosch University and ABSA, they're also very upbeat. And we are reaching record levels in them because people, when they are surveyed, they're looking back at the bad times and they're seeing that recovery.
Well, the numbers look good. Anything that is above 50, I think it tells you that there's some activity in the market from the industrial point of view. But I think what is even more encouraging that the number is actually moving towards 60.
Economists explain that the sudden improvement will slow down as the country nears 2019 growth levels. Nonetheless, the improvement is welcomed.
Here and there are still sectors that are really struggling, such as tourism and new car sales, for example, because of the chip shortage worldwide. But ultimately, I think for most sectors in the economy, they are back at the levels they were or very close to the levels they were before the pandemic struck.
The metals and engineering sectors weren't as fortunate in the first quarter. There was improvement, but it could have been better.
We actually, at our metals and engineering sector alone, we are around 76% in terms of capacity utilization. Within the total manufacturing sector, we are around 77% in terms of capacity utilization. So that is something encouraging. But I will tell you what, that would have actually been much more better if there was some other issues of challenges in terms of raw material supplies were actually addressed appropriately.
There's one red flag that most economies will have to deal with sooner or later. Inflation is starting to tick upwards.
We need to understand that there will be a manner of inflation coming back because the supply chain of the world is still in a bit of a hiccup phase where you will not have everything back at the same time that you need. So some goods and prices will rise in price, but we have to be very vigilant going forward, I think.
All indications are that the South African economy is on the move. Everything is in place for it to take advantage of those opportunities as they present themselves. Now that just needs to happen. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's now go back to our top story today. Of course, payments giant Visa and financial services provider Tala are partnering to boost cryptocurrency adoption in emerging markets. Well, let's get some insight into the future of cryptos and, of course, blockchain technology. Following this development, we are now joined by Mpho Dagada. He is a crypto expert and member of the Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Great to have you on the show with us today, sir. Now, of course, this new initiative by Tala and Visa, it is a first for Africa, and it certainly seems like it could potentially catapult the use of cryptos in Africa going forward, especially because it provides access to the underbanked. What are your thoughts on the impact that a project like this will have on the use of cryptos on the continent going forward?
Sorry about that. My microphone was on mute. I hope you can hear me. Good evening to all your listeners and to yourselves there in studio. I think, it's very important to note that blockchain technology has come through in this world as a disruptive technology. It's a technology of the fourth industrial revolution, of which its aim and purpose is to make the world a more honest and transparent place, and obviously interconnect the world, so make sure that we're all interconnected and able to participate in the global economy. Now, I believe this new development is only proving what blockchain technology is here to do, and that is connect the world to be able to transact in a much honest, transparent, and faster way. So we will be seeing more of this. And even here in South Africa, we started to see some amazing projects that are following suit. So we're really, really excited about what this technology is doing.
Now, of course, this project will kick off with a stable coin called USDC, which is backed by the US dollar. Given that right now the spotlight seems to be mostly on volatile cryptos such as Bitcoin, how much market interest is there in stable coins in Africa?
So that's quite an interesting question, because actually tomorrow I'm in Durban in the KwaZulu-Natal province in South Africa. And what we're doing is we're launching a cryptocurrency that's actually backed by physical property. So this is a cryptocurrency that's actually backed by world-class real estate. And that's really something very exciting, because it's not every day where we see cryptocurrencies that are actually backed by something. So tomorrow in Durban at 10 o'clock, 10:30 in the morning at the Royal Hotel, there's a presentation that we're doing where we'll be launching a cryptocurrency that's backed by property. So what we're seeing is that, Bitcoin was sort of the first on the entrance. Now the rest of the world and everybody on board is coming on board and saying, how can we tokenize and digitize every single thing that we've got? So tomorrow, for example, we'll also be shooting this live on Zoom. So anybody who follows on social media can watch the live presentation, and anybody who's in Durban can come through to the Royal Hotel at 10:30 in the morning, where property will be tokenized on a blockchain and anybody can get involved from all around the world. So it's very exciting, and we're living in a time where literally blockchain technology is the urgent and needed solution to many of the world's problems.
Now, we'll talk a little bit more about blockchain after this question. As you said, cryptos are quite exciting, but the reality right now is that they are facing quite a lot of opposition from regulators. For example, in Kenya and Nigeria, we're seeing central banks limiting how much banks or financial institutions can do business with crypto-based companies. So given that we are seeing non-traditional players such as Tala, mobile money lenders entering the game now, who do you think is winning this fight? Is it the players in the crypto space, or is it the regulators?
Thank you for that question. Allow me to be very strict in answering and actually rebuke those specific politicians that are trying to stop the digital revolution. And this is the biggest problem we have in Africa. Majority of people in Africa are the youth. The majority in Africa are young people. And what's going on is that the leadership of Africa and those that are leading in these governments are actually old and outdated in their thinking. We must be very honest. Any single country that tries to stop innovation and technology is fighting against its youth and is killing its youth's chance of actually taking part in the digital revolution. So we're very, very firm on this matter to say, as young people in Africa and as enthusiasts of the blockchain revolution, that it's very unacceptable for regulators and governments, and this is only a few governments that are untransformed and that have got old, archaic people who have never understood how the digital revolution works in these countries. And even in these countries where there are these problems, there are young people that are doing great innovation, that are coming up and saying, we need a change of leadership. We can't have a 60-year-old regulator or a board that's sitting with 70-year-olds in Africa trying to tell us that cryptocurrencies or the digital revolution is not the way to go. It doesn't make sense. So I truly believe that the winners of this fight will be the young people, that you can't stop the digital revolution. So what we need is a change in regulators to the young people that are relevant, understand where the world is going, and that will fight for the future of young people within Africa. So the problem lies with old, archaic, and stubborn leaders that don't want to change when the world has changed.
Well, on that note, besides cryptocurrencies, as you mentioned, there is a lot of discussion around using blockchain technology to hopefully decentralize, develop other instruments and digital identities for e-commerce going forward. What are your thoughts on the growth of that space specifically?
I think this is a beautiful solution for Africa, because if you look at where Africa is sitting, we've got so many products, so many indigenous plants, so many indigenous things, so many products that Africans have created over years. And the biggest problem that we've got is the distribution of these products. And through a blockchain system or through a cryptocurrency, we move away from having currency issues. We move away from having issues that, payments take too long and people aren't able to participate in economies in a fast and innovative way. And we move into this world where the technology allows us to do things faster, simpler, and in a more transparent and honest manner where everybody's able to see what's going on. So I believe that this is the future for Africa, that Africa is indeed embracing technology. And those few places where we do have hiccups, where some regulators are misunderstanding things or are simply uneducated about the digital revolution, those will be solved very soon as they see that the rest of the world is embracing it. That this technology that we see today, where e-commerce, tokenization, smart contracts, Ethereum, Bitcoin, blockchain, etc., that this is now the new economy which the world needs, especially after COVID, because this sort of economy allows each and every entrepreneur, each and every employee, each and every business owner to be able to interact globally within the global markets without the restrictions that we're currently seeing right now around the world. So I believe that this is the next future for Africa.
Well, we have to leave it there, Mpo. Thank you so much for joining us and for those insights. Of course, that's Mpo Dagada, a crypto expert. Well, let's now turn our attention to the corporate headlines for the day. Now, the European Medicines Agency has begun a real-time review of the COVID-19 antibody treatment developed by GSK and Vir Biotechnology. The EU drug regulator says it started a rolling review of Sotro Vimab based on early results from an ongoing study into whether the treatment can prevent hospitalization or death in people who do not yet have severe COVID-19. Now, GSK and Vir reported in March that their medicine reduced the risk of hospitalization and deaths amongst patients by about 85%, and that's based on interim clinical data. Meanwhile, Square Pharmaceuticals, one of Bangladesh's largest drug makers, is set to start producing medicines at its multi-billion production facility here in Kenya in the next 4 months. The drug maker broke ground on its manufacturing plant in Nairobi back in 2018. The unit was initially set to begin production in 2020. However, it was delayed. Now, trial production at the new facility is expected to begin on July 31st. Amongst the drugs lined for production are for diabetes, malaria, and antipsychotic diseases. Meanwhile, Egypt Air will start weekly flights between the Red Sea resort of Hurghada and the Czech Republic's capital of Prague from the 23rd of May. The move is part of efforts to promote tourism to the North African nation. According to an official statement by the national carrier, the flight will be operated by the airline's latest Airbus A220-300s, which is able to accommodate 140 passengers. And finally, BMW says it remains on course to meet its profit targets for 2021, and that's despite rising raw material costs and a global chip shortage. Now, BMW has largely steered clear of the semiconductor chip shortage battering a rival such as Europe's biggest car maker, Volkswagen. BMW's sales of its electric vehicles more than doubled in the first quarter. The German car maker benefited from higher prices and a strong demand in China, as it expects to have 2 million fully electric cars on the road by 2025. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we are going to head into a short break now, still coming up on the show. Sudan restricts commodity imports to ease forex shortages. And we explore the impact of climate change on Africa's economies in our special series tonight.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sotro Vimab.
Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back. Now, Sudan has taken steps to streamline strategic commodities and to stop non-essential imports months after a sharp currency devaluation. The Sudanese central bank devalued the pound back in February in a bid to unify official and black market exchange rates, and that's amid worsening hard currency shortages and a crippling economic crisis in the country. Here's Adel El Mahoui with the details.
After Sudan introduced an 85% devaluation of its pounds in February, the government appeared to have managed foreign currency prices. Yet in recent days, the black market began to re-emerge, with the US dollars trading at up to 400 pounds, 18 more pounds than the official rate. Moving rapidly to regain control over the forex markets, the government restricted importing non-essential goods.
We have been calling for that step for years. It lifts the pressing demand on the dollar. It will also stop the flood of foreign currency to merchants, who in turn trade in dollars and create the parallel unofficial forex market. The control on imports will definitely curb that phenomenon.
But not everyone is happy with the new imports restrictions, especially that the government has not announced a clear list of the banned items.
To restrict imports of non-essential goods shows that the government is hesitant in its economic policy. It should be heading to a free market policy, but it takes contradictory measures. Also, we need a clear definition of what these complementary goods are. Maybe some people would consider them essential.
The political instability that followed President Omar al-Bashir's ouster saw Sudan fall into a deep economic crisis. Inflation reached a phenomenal 340%, putting immense pressure on the African nation, which is now seeing shortages in strategic goods and essential medicines.
Sudan is turning into a 100% consuming society. We import shoes in terrible quality and clothes. That must stop. We must go back to producing these products domestically. The government should direct the dollars saved into bringing in raw material to boost manufacturing domestically.
Currently, the Sudanese central bank only allows commercial banks to sell foreign currencies to customers for specific purposes. That includes travel, education fees, medical treatment, or the import of goods. Moving to guarantee a steady flow of foreign currencies into the country, the Sudanese government will soon announce a list of incentives at banks to encourage remittances to enter the country through official channels. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
And moving on now, parts of Africa are being ravaged by natural disasters at a frequency not seen in many decades. Countries in Eastern Africa are still struggling to deal with the worst invasion of desert locusts in nearly a century. But before that, Mozambique was battered by 2 tropical cyclones for the first time in recorded history. Well, here's CGTN's Ramanyang exploring why climate change is one of, if not the largest issue, which is facing many African economies today.
Thank you very much. Now, of course, in 2021, there's virtually no part of any of our lives or business activity which has not been touched in any way by climate change. We'll be exploring these changes in the course of this series, from nature's displacement of persons, be they hundreds or hundreds of thousands, to farming, to the challenge of deciding who should implement climate adaptations, and more importantly, at what cost. But first, let's take a look at the big picture.
The biggest problem now facing the world is climate change.
Climate change, an existential threat to not only the environment, but to the economy.
We are on the verge of the abyss.
Climate change has drastically altered what used to be somewhat steady, predictable weather patterns for hundreds of millions of us. But things are changing. And as you will see shortly, they're not changing for the better. The last 10 years have been described as a decade of exceptional heat. Those are not my words, but that's the description used by the World Meteorological Organization. 2020, you see, was one of the 3 warmest years on record. It was just after 2016 and just barely ahead of 2019. But these are dry numbers. It's one thing to say, here's the data. It's another thing entirely, though, to actually see and be subject to the effects of these changes. For millions around the world, this is not just dry numbers on an Excel spreadsheet or in a United Nations report. Take Sudan, for example. That country received some pretty heavy rainfall in 2020 that raised the Blue Nile to levels not seen in a century at around 17 meters. Water levels, in fact, had risen to a point where the pyramids of Meroe, these are structures that are over 2,000 years old, face the very real threat of being flooded and possibly irreparably damaged. With over 2 million hectares of farms flooded, over 1 million tons of grain destroyed, the extreme weather combined with the worst desert locust invasion in decades has left nearly 10 million people in Sudan deeply food insecure. But there was severe flooding in other parts of the continent too. The Niger River, for example, in West Africa, that also rose to record levels. With that much water sloshing around the continent, that also amplified yet another problem. The worst desert locust invasion that the Horn of Africa has had to deal with in decades, in some countries' cases in almost a century. Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, they all still continue to struggle with that problem, even in 2021. By the end of November, there were 30 named storms in the North Atlantic. That is the largest number so far on record. According to Christine Lagarde, the head of the European Central Bank, the estimated damage that you could essentially put in monetary terms attributable to natural hazards last year alone was on the order of $210 billion. That's essentially like taking the combined GDP of Kenya and Ethiopia and destroying that just through natural causes and nothing else. In financial circles, this has led to another emerging problem. In order to limit a rise in global average temperatures to less than 1.5 degrees Celsius, it essentially implies that a lot of oil and gas resources have to remain in the ground. But if you're a country that's heavily reliant on oil and gas revenue now, like Nigeria, or in the future, like Uganda, then these assets, as the Bank for International Settlements puts it, may suffer from unanticipated, sudden write-downs, devaluations, or conversion to liabilities. Put another way, these oil and gas assets may become worthless a lot faster than expected. But this then also raises another related argument. If oil and gas assets need to remain untouched and in the ground, then whose oil and gas assets should remain untouched? Should it be Nigeria and Angola, whose greenhouse gas emissions are nowhere near as large as those of the United States, which is among the top 3 oil producers in the world? How do you make that choice? That's just one of the many knotty questions that countries must tackle ahead of the UN Climate Change Conference later this year in November. In the meantime, though, the damage being inflicted by climate change continues. In 2019, tens of thousands of Kenyans living close to the shores of lakes in the Rift Valley were displaced by steadily rising water levels. From Lake Bogoria to Baringo to Naivasha, the rise of these lakes has been relentless, even today. As CGTN's Nick Mudimba now reports, experts are warning that this trend may not ease in future.
Early 2019 was tough for many near the Rift Valley lakes. Families were displaced due to the surging waters from different lakes. Businesses were shut, schools closed, and human-wildlife conflict took a different turn. It wasn't. This is Lake Baringo, one of the 2 freshwater lakes in Kenya and part of East Africa Rift system. The situation here hasn't improved and schools have been forced to move for safety. The water levels have surged to abnormal levels. Many residents who were born and raised in this area are still surprised. What was once their beauty and pride has now become a tormentor.
I've lived here all my life, and at one time the lake was about 3.5 kilometers away from where we're standing. It was all dry. That's in the 90s, early 90s.
In the lake, the threat is visible. Crocodiles are now closer than ever. The risk is clear. Just a few meters away, we spot a fisherman. His facial expression summarizes dejection. The amount of fish has greatly reduced, affecting their sole economic activity, and the well-being is shaky.
There was so much fish on this lake before, but now things have changed. There is no fish. Fishing frequency has reduced now. I only fish twice a day.
This school is one of the learning institutions in this region that was affected by the flooding waters. The evidence of its existence is all clear.
It's been more than 1 year since the students in this class enjoyed the comfort in their studies. But right now, the climatic change wrath took no prisoners and had to build on a higher ground for them to continue with education. The hope right now is actually just to pray that the waters will actually subside for them to come back and enjoy their education.
Climatologist Jackson Kenyanjui is a PhD student taking agricultural meteorology and climate change at the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences. He is also the founder of Climate Change Kenya.
The Rift Valley comes from a depression because first and foremost, the Rift Valley was formed through the tectonic activities. It moved. And science has shown that these tectonic movements actually move at a rate of these plates. They are separating at 1 centimeter every year. And the tectonic movements that we are exhibiting right now are in regard to one, we have the Nubian plate moving to the west, and we have the Somali plate moving to the east. They are all separating from the Arabian plate. So all these plates, once they are moving apart, expect that there is underground water. First of all, you have to notice that the earth is made up of 70% water. And in this 70% amount of water, not all of it is on the surface. We have underground water. So this underground water, some of it is stored in the aquifers. So once these tectonic plates start moving, expect this water now to come onto the surface. So that's now we see there's a surge in the increase in these water levels in this lake. Some of it is coming from underground.
Other causes include humanity use of fossil fuel, deforestation, increasingly intensive agriculture, global warming, waste disposal, among others. Climate change, biodiversity loss, waste and pollution are some of the pressing issues Kenya took to the floor of the United Nations Environment Assembly in February. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Baringo, Kenya.
From East Africa, let's head south. South Africa is the most industrialized economy on the continent, but it's also the largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions in Africa. Over 90% of the electricity generated and consumed in the country comes from coal-fired power plants, and 2 of those, in fact, Medupi and Kusile, are among the 10 largest in the world. CGTN's Sumitra Naidu takes up the story.
South Africa is responsible for half of Africa's total carbon emissions. That's because 90% of electricity in the country is generated from coal. Eskom, though, has been included in government's plans to reduce emissions.
In the context of our history and where we're going to in the future, what's important to bear in mind is that the coal plants that are contributing to the emissions were built many, many years ago. And so we see that as we shut down those plants now and start to replace them with lower carbon technologies, we will have a positive impact on the NDC targets and our contribution to the Paris Agreement. I think our role is very pivotal and key to South Africa achieving its NDC targets.
The long-term emissions pathway will see South Africa's emissions peak, then begin to plateau before eventually dropping down to net zero emissions by 2050. But the strategy also concedes substantial and rapid emission cuts are required. However, it comes with risks to economic growth and sustainable development. Shutting down coal means investing heavily in renewables and cutting jobs. There's an estimated 82,000 people working at the mines, with an additional 50,000 in companies that burn coal.
We see a lot of opportunity coming in the development of renewable technologies themselves, where there's potential to create a large number of jobs through the value chain of renewable energy development. especially if we do renewable energy at scale. There's a huge potential for us to manufacture solar panels, but also on the wind side, things like the gantries, like the poles, the towers, all of those things that you need. There's a possibility for us to manufacture in the country. So yes, there will be job losses, but there will be job creation.
Several old coal-fired powered stations are due to be decommissioned over the next 10 years as part of South Africa's new climate strategy. But its success will depend on political will and deep pockets.
All lenders and investors must urgently end financing for any new fossil fuel projects, and they must implement plans to responsibly phase out financing to existing fossil fuel projects. Because every single fossil fuel project that is currently planned or under development is decreasing our chances of reaching the goals of Paris.
Parliament is expected to adopt higher ambitions for South Africa's emission reduction contributions in line with the Paris Climate Accord by June, ahead of COP26. A new Presidential Commission on Climate Change has also been established to ensure the country makes the changes that are needed. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
So then, from South Africa, let's head west. With per capita carbon emissions of barely 0.7 tons back in 2017, Nigeria's emissions are a fraction of other countries on the continent. The equivalent figure for South Africa in that year was 12 times higher. Now, despite its small emissions footprint, Nigeria has seen a steep rise in extreme heat and accelerated desertification. The latter is partly responsible for exacerbating the conflict that we're seeing between pastoralists and farmers, especially in the country centre. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with that story.
This seaside community in Lagos is a clear example of the visible impact climate change is having on Nigeria. The Alpha Beach community is rapidly being submerged because of rising ocean levels in this part of Lagos, threatening this community of over 10,000 people. In the north of the country, desert encroachment and drought are driving people further inland. This often leads to clashes between farmers and pastoralists who are in search of water and pasture for their herds. Analysts blame it all on climate change.
When we have this long series of droughts, the soil, thickens, and if eventually it rains, rather than the soil absorbing the water, that will be difficult because of the hardness of the soil. So the water will not be able to percolate and it begins to flow, and that creates a flash flooding, which is what we've been having in the Middle Belt.
This is a common sight in Nigeria's oil-rich Niger Delta. Gas flaring is a huge environmental challenge in the region. Data from the country's National Oil Spill Detection and Response Agency, NOSDRA, shows that Nigeria flared 1.7 billion cubic feet of gas between 2012 and 2020, valued at $6 billion.
The impact of gas flaring is very, very significant. It is a waste of resources. In one of the reports of the World Bank, it was explicitly reported that the gas being flared is enough to power the whole of the African continent.
Gas flaring and oil spillage combine to make Nigeria's Niger Delta region one of the most polluted places on the planet. The government had targeted to end gas flaring last year, but it missed it, leaving the country to aim for the 2030 target of the Paris Accord. It's also facing challenges in addressing the devastation caused by oil spillage in the Delta region. But the government is driving a campaign for cleaner energy. It's pledged to cut its greenhouse gas emissions by 20% by 2030. It's also launched an ambitious plan to have 1 million cars run on gas by the end of this year.
Nigeria will champion those initiatives that will surprise the rest of the Africans. Just keep your fingers crossed in the next few weeks as you see some more initiatives that are coming from the Office of the Federal Minister of Environment in tackling climate change beyond what we know.
There is indeed a gravitation towards cleaner energy in Nigeria. More solar panels are popping up on rooftops across the country. The government itself has launched a massive solar power project aiming at 5 million solar connections for off-grid communities. A local automobile firm recently unveiled the first locally assembled electric car in the country. So everything seems to be coming together as Nigeria shifts towards cleaner energy. But then, a lot of work still lies ahead. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Let's head over to North Africa. People living along Tunisia's coastline are increasingly becoming vulnerable to rising sea levels. Increasing coastal erosion and warmer sea waters are also threatening habitats that are vital to sustaining human activity and marine biodiversity too. As CGTN's Adin Chuachi now reports, for a country where 1 in 10 people are employed in the tourism sector, these changes are a significant problem.
Hassan is a fisherman in the city of La Goulette in northern Tunisia. He was born and raised near the port, where he now earns a living through fishing. Hassan says climate change has had a negative impact on his work.
Fish populations are declining and fish food is becoming rarer as the sea warms. Some species have disappeared from this area over the past 4 decades. They were replaced by some invasive species. The decline in the size of fish is also noticeable, while the quantity is very limited.
Experts have warned that diseases affecting some marine species are spreading. Many traditional fishermen fear they will lose their main source of income due to climate change.
Climate change is impacting fisheries. The local economy depends on fishing. Thousands of jobs could be lost if the state doesn't act quickly.
The country's Secretary of State of the Sea says climate change poses a major challenge. The Tunisian government has launched several projects to protect sandy beaches and coastal aquifers.
The state is providing the necessary means and financial resources to protect the coastline and the population, especially fishermen who depend on the sea. In addition, Tunisia's coastline has a huge potential for the development of the blue economy. There is an urgent need to build the marine ecosystem's resilience against climate change.
A recent study by the Tunisian Union of Agriculture and Fisheries has revealed that climate change has affected some fish species that have shifted away from shallow coastal waters, where temperatures will increase fastest, into deeper, cooler waters. The partnership between the Department of Maritime Affairs and several international organizations, as well as the civil society, aims to improve livelihoods on the coastline. Tunisian authorities have urged Mediterranean countries to cooperate in order to limit the impact of climate change. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And that story from Tunisia, a country on the shores of the Mediterranean, wraps up this snapshot of how climate change isn't just changing government policy. It's changing how we do business. It's changing our daily lives across a continent that's home to over 1 billion people. As the Paris Climate Agreement turns 5 this year, the question of what is the ideal adaptation path and who will bear the costs of that adaptation still remains. Back to you in studio.
You're watching Global Business Africa. On that note, let's head into a short break, but still coming up on the show. China's private sector exports increased by 40%. And India's lucrative diamond industry dealt a blow by COVID-19 infection.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now, here's a quick recap of other headlines this hour. The World Health Organization has given the green light to the Chinese vaccine made by Sinopharm for global emergency uses. Now, it becomes the fifth vaccine backed by the WHO, following Pfizer, BioNTech, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, and of course Moderna. The approval affirms the efficacy and safety of the vaccine, which has already been approved for use in dozens of countries. And experts appointed by the International Court of Justice have asked Uganda to pay the Democratic Republic of Congo $215 million as compensation for looting its minerals and damaging its infrastructure during a conflict that occurred 23 years ago. The experts made the recommendation during the hearing of arguments in a reparations dispute between the DRC and Uganda at The Hague. And Somalia has restored diplomatic relations with Kenya. Ties between the two nations were severed in December last year after Somalia accused Kenya of interfering in its internal affairs. Now, relations between the two have also been tense over the ownership of potential oil and gas deposits, some of which lie off the coast of Jubaland, which is one of Somalia's 5 semi-autonomous states. The Gulf state of Qatar helped broker talks that saw the resumption of those ties. And finally, Egypt and Turkey have been holding political consultations in Cairo as part of a push to mend ties between the regional rivals. The two countries have been at odds over their conflicting positions on the Muslim Brotherhood, the war in Libya, and of course maritime borders in the Eastern Mediterranean. And that's a recap of other top headlines this hour. Now to some international news. China's exports from the private sector saw a jump in the first 4 months of this year, totaling 5.5 trillion yuan, and that's up more than 40% year on year. And its products, ranging from food to home appliances, have proved their popularity overseas, as Song Yaotin now reports.
This auto-cleaning robot can feel where the stain is and adjust its water and suction power. It can also remove dirty water to avoid secondhand pollution. It's produced by a company in eastern China's Jiangsu province, and it's just one of a dozen of new products catering to our new sanitizing needs following the COVID-19 pandemic.
This set of products catered to the needs of people who are more conscious about sanitation. We have received a large amount of orders selling to 30-plus countries.
Thanks to high-tech products like these, the eastern city of Suzhou is making a brand for itself, from made in Suzhou to smart manufacturing of Suzhou. The city has seen sales of 200 billion yuan of high-tech products from January to April, up 30% year on year. Central and Western China also saw robust growth, with its exports jumping 39% on year in value. Liuzhou's luo sifen, or river snail rice noodle, has grown from a street food to an export specialty. Apart from classic flavors, this company has also developed a tomato version for the European market and spicy flavors for the Southeast Asian market.
7 million yuan of our river snail rice noodles have been exported to other countries over the first 4 months, and that is 4 times compared to the same period last year. Outbound countries and regions have increased to over 20, and it's been a spotlight for local exports.
China's exports to Belt and Road countries also rose 25% year on year for the first 4 months of this year. Walnuts from Hetian in Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region was one of the contributors. Their walnuts are highly prized for their thin shells and large nuts, and they usually grow in unpolluted soil with enough light and heat all year round.
Our company alone exported 1,300 tons of walnuts from January to April, up 10% on year. We mainly export to Belt and Road countries like Turkey and Russia.
Boarding the China-Europe Railway Express, it only takes 2 months for these nuts to arrive on Europe's dining table. In fact, Xinjiang's walnuts now account for 30% of Europe's market share. That's not the only food product the region boasts. Exports of tomatoes, peaches, dates, and roses from Xinjiang are also seeing a boost to Belt and Road countries. Song Yaotian, CGTN.
Well, let's head to India now. The country's diamond hub of Surat is facing a production crisis as 60% of migrant workers leave, fearing a coronavirus lockdown, and that's following an unprecedented surge in cases. Now, India on Friday reported a record daily rise in coronavirus cases of over 400,000, while deaths from COVID-19 swelled by 3,915. Meanwhile, Gujarat state has been reporting over 10,000 new cases daily over the past couple of days, prompting the government to consider other kinds of restrictions on non-essential businesses. Last year, millions of migrant workers took an arduous journey on foot, bicycles and hitchhiking to reach their homes after the federal government announced a surprise lockdown. About 100 people lost their lives in the journey back home.
All those who work in our factories, about 50 to 60% of them have moved back to their villages. We are really feeling their absence. They have left because of a build-up to the lockdown. They are scared that if a lockdown is imposed, then they will anyway have to go to their villages because they experienced the hardships of the first lockdown. They already left as a preemptive move.
A lot of workers have left, including those in the machinery segment. The diamond industry works on 5 to 6 stages. It takes many levels to get the polished diamond. There is a shortage of workers starting from the first stage itself, so it is obvious that the rest of the production is also affected. So there is a shortage of items in the industry.
Now, Cuban cigar sales are a major source of income for Cuba. The sector took a hit over the past year due to COVID-19, but industry leaders remain hopeful about the future. Here's CGTN's Luis Chirino reporting from Havana.
The fine tobacco leaves cultivated in Cuba are the source of the renowned Habano premium cigars, including the flagship brand Cohiba. Its 55th anniversary marked at a virtual event this week. Habano's company executives had some good news to announce with regards to international demand, announcing that China is now its #1 market for Habano cigars, overtaking Spain. But COVID-19 still left its mark in 2020, with overall revenues at $507 million, down 4%. With no tourists amid a pandemic, traditional sales in Cuba dried up. This Habano cigar shop in the Cuban capital, like many others around the country, has its shelves full with premium cigars. However, sales have dropped dramatically due to a lack of clients caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. In the world of Habanos, humidors are crucial for cigar preservation. Angel Miranda is an experienced humidor maker who has added the art of respected Cuban painters on unique collection pieces, a joint artistic initiative that's resulting in humidor sales around the world, including China.
Our design and the artistic touch gave way to a unique product uncommon to the humidor market because we are the only ones who make it this way.
Artists involved in the project are happy to be part of the initiative.
This is like a painting on 3D format, not the usual flat canvas, so all sides here must coincide. This actually was a challenge.
But COVID-19 has also left its imprint on Angel's business.
COVID has affected our business 100%. Zero sales, zero production, a full stop. We have used this time to think of new projects for the future when the pandemic ends.
In the meantime, Angel devotes his time to promoting visual artists on social media, confident that once the pandemic is controlled, his distinctive humidors will again carry bundles of Habano cigars in their drawers around Cuba and the world. Luis Chirino, CGTN, Havana.
And shifting focus now, here's a quick look at commodity markets today. Oil prices steadying and were set for a weekly gain against the backdrop of optimism over a global economic recovery, though the COVID-19 crisis in India did cap those prices today. Gold prices rising to a 2.5-month high. They were on track for their best week in 6 months, boosted by a weaker dollar and a pullback in treasury yields, as of course investors cautiously wait for U.S. jobs numbers expected today. Well, let's now move on to South Africa. The country's wine industry is pinning its hopes on COVID-19 vaccines to help revive tourism in this area. The industry has been battered by lockdown restrictions and, of course, liquor bans in the last year. Here's Sumitra Naidu with more.
Wine tourism contributed over $171 million to the South African economy in 2019. This number is tripled when taking into account the indirect and induced contribution to GDP. It's become an important industry and forms a big chunk of overall tourism in the country, which is why stakeholders are feeling the impacts of COVID.
We have estimated financial losses of roughly 8.5 billion rand, as well as roughly 22,000 job losses in our industry. And that stretches also way beyond just the wine industry, all the way through hospitality, events, and even the transport sector, as well as manufacturing of glass for the bottles and packaging.
The liquor bans have been lifted and lockdown restrictions eased, but COVID remains a real threat. While domestic tourism is open, foreign arrivals to South Africa dropped by over 70%. The wine industry in South Africa is banking on the vaccination programs already underway in most European countries to see a strong rebound in overseas travelers.
The rollout of the vaccine is very important for the South African wine industry. Not only does it mean tourism can return to the Western Cape, where those all-important cellar door sales to tourists are so important to our producers, but also for our locals to be able to travel to our international markets where they can promote and sell their wines to agents, buyers, importers.
South Africa's own rollout may take much longer. Phase 1 of the vaccination drive is still underway. Over 500,000 healthcare workers will need to get vaccinated before the rollout enters Phase 2.
I think it remains to be seen how successful our vaccine rollout is going to be. Currently, South Africa is very highly on the list of no travel countries or with travel warnings against it. So I think as soon as our vaccine rollout takes effect and we can show that this can be done effectively and efficiently, we're expecting an influx of tourism.
Since COVID-19 reached our shores, there's been 3 liquor bans in South Africa. The wine industry on its own lost $530 million.
Exports made up for some of the losses, but the liquor bans and COVID restrictions at the ports still left a surplus of 400 million bottles of wine.
At the moment, the industry is looking forward to the future. We've just had a very successful harvest following a year of very good rains during our rainy season, and our winemakers are all busy in their cellars.
Wine tasting and accommodation in the Western Cape makes up the bulk of wine tourism in South Africa. This industry accounts for 34,000 direct and indirect jobs, all of which depends largely on foreign tourism, which hopefully rebounds soon as people get vaccinated here and abroad. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, before we leave you today, a quick look at Africa's currencies. South Africa's rand subdued today, and that was ahead of the scheduled review of its sovereign credit by Moody's, of course expected to happen today. Meanwhile, Nigeria's naira strengthening at the importers and exporters window. It closed at around 409 naira per dollar. It maintained some stability at the parallel market, even as we saw the central bank issuing an indefinite extension of its naira for dollar scheme for foreign remittances. Of course, that was aimed at sustaining the country's foreign exchange market liquidity going forward. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.